I am like ecstatic that I got the longerons out of the way. That was, it was hanging over my head. And so in the spirit of that, I'm gonna take on the next biggest piece of this that I haven't really wanted to do. And I'm just gonna work my way down to the smallest, easiest task I have. That should make this a much more enjoyable experience. So with that, we're gonna work on the side skins next. That was like easily 3 weeks ago, and the motivation you see in the clip didn't last. I tried. I thought it'd be like going to the gym. Once you show up and get moving, it gets easier. Except it didn't. And in my gym analogy, I was like the dude who just sits on the bike barely pedaling, scrolling on his phone. I even got a blue Sharpie out and tried to make some notes. Make some notes in Sharpie, which is weird because I know it's not a real effective way of going about this, and later has to be washed off or it bleeds through the paint and primer and generally just makes a mess. So I put it down for a bit. I worked a little bit on what I call admin tasks or project management. I wrote a small Python program, had little to do with airplanes or anything really, and then I just took a bit of rest. But after a while I got back at it. So I apologize for the delay. I wish I had the energy to build and produce a video each week. It is my goal, but sometimes a bit of a break is necessary. I'm excited to bring to you a look at my remotivation, picking back up momentum and getting ready to once again build a frickin' airplane. The side skins are riddled with holes that don't get dimpled or get countersunk instead of dimpled, or are dimpled to different sizes. So the only way that I've found to go about this is having my rivet guide, rivet plan if you will, next to me the entire time. I'm going ahead and using my blue tape to mark off what's not dimpled. From there, it should just be a mixture of number 40 and number 30 dimples. Of course, nothing is that simple. There's a rivet here that I've heard can interfere with the rear spar. And some folks have chosen to dimple that and install a countersunk rivet. Easy peasy, but not quite, because it's so close to where on this piece our brackets here accept the rear spar. It's really hard once this is on the plane to sink this rivet with any sort of set. In fact, everybody I've seen has had to modify a set to put a countersunk rivet in there because you can no longer hit it with the double offset universal head rivet set. So sort of a darned if you do, darned if you don't situation, and that's what slows these things down. I don't know whether I want to countersink it or not. For now, I'm going to leave it open and I'm going to ponder on that a little bit. Similarly, we have some rivets up here where we have not pre-drilled anything. What they're going to wind up accepting is, I believe, the panel, the avionics panel, and where that intersects the skin. But again, they haven't been match drilled. They haven't had the required steps. They haven't been deburred, which is easy, but still, we're not quite to the countersinking phase. But if I don't hit it now, is it going to be nearly impossible to countersink these once the skin is on the plane? I'll do my best to research what other folks have done, and I'm very thankful that I'm not the first to build this plane, or else we wouldn't have made it past step one. straight edges of skins used to be a nightmare and a very time-consuming task. This thing makes short work. This is that 90-degree grinder from Pan American Tool that I won. It's the Nova grinder, 20,000 RPM with conditioning wheels. It's not just the skins it works wonders on, and we're gonna see it used a lot more in the next steps. But one of my favorite uses is the edges of skins. It works quickly, so you gotta be careful, but that's the awesome part, is it works quickly on a task that used to just take me forever. So fantastic addition to the toolbox here. So these skins are too large for me to try to get to in a booth, for really me to try and take on two at a time at all. Deburring, dimpling, any of the process. So I'm gonna do one all the way through. We'll set it aside when it's dry, and I'll do the second all the way through. And that's why I picked these pieces. Aside from the longerons, these are the next pieces I really wasn't looking forward to doing. There's a lot of work here, and so let's just tackle it right off the bat while I'm still fresh, so to speak. And we will move on to smaller and what could be perceived as more fun parts. The reason I giggle a little bit is because this is not my first attempt at these pieces. In fact, a week ago, I went and I tried to do what I've done today, and I just didn't have it in me. And I had to take a break. What I did do was took some time on the admin side of the project, and I want to go a bit into more on that in a segment I'm going to call Laser Cut Corners. All right, I hope anybody affiliated with vans that happens to see this has as much of a sense of humor about the title as I do. It's about due time to take another look at the laser cut parts issues facing vans, kits, and their builders, and how it affects me and therefore my build and this channel. I want to provide a very brief recap for anybody who's not currently aware of what's facing vans kit builders. In the last few years, Vans has seen an unprecedented demand in their kits, and in order to meet that demand, they subcontracted out certain parts to be produced by a third-party vendor. That vendor, rather than using a punch press like Vans uses, utilized a laser. And that laser and its tool paths at some point started generating parts that certain builders deemed unfit for their build. To be more specific, certain parts, when dimpled, have a propensity to crack around the laser cut holes. Builders were able to raise this issue to a high enough level that Vans eventually acknowledged it as an issue and began a process of testing and analysis of these parts. We are in the midst of that testing and analysis. Vans has released part lists so that builders can identify which parts are possibly laser cut within their kits. They have further classified some parts as acceptable for use and others as replacement recommended. I fall into a category that I consider to be very lucky when it comes to my kit. Why is that? Well, there's a few things that come into play here. First, I've selected a Vans kit that isn't quite as popular as some of the newer ones. The 7 doesn't sell quite as many models as the 10 or the 14 or perhaps even the 12. And as a result, I believe there was more parts on the shelf and also less kits going out, therefore less parts needing to be produced via third-party vendor in order to keep pace with the demand. Another thing that seems to be saving my bacon a little bit is that my ordering was towards the beginning of the period of the laser cut parts reliance, and so I seem to have dodged several date deadlines with my parts that allow me to be confident that they were produced on a punch. Where does that leave me? Well, I've showed before a document that I have of every laser cut part identified by Vans, either acceptable for use or replacement recommended. Currently, it sits at about 76 individual SKUs and roughly 149 parts that could potentially be laser cut within a 7. I've taken this list and I've been able to eliminate it and whittle it down to very few parts. And let's see how that's done. Now, the first way we're going to eliminate some parts is by trusting Vans that when they say a part is acceptable for use and their testing deems it worthy of use within your kit, we take that on its word. And if I eliminate all those parts, I go from 149 roughly parts down to 45 parts. That is a huge chunk of parts and a huge weight off my back. Now, still, 45 parts incorporated in my plane somewhere that need replacement is a daunting task. Luckily for me, that's not quite the case. I can further eliminate some based on the date that my kit was created and the date that the parts were starting to be produced by laser. If we do that, I can go down again to only 36 parts within my kit. Still a lot, but a little bit more stomachable. Again, I can further narrow that by utilizing photos that I've taken of my build, and of course, the videos that have followed me the whole way. If we start to eliminate some of those, either by photo exclusion, or when I happen to have grabbed an image of the tag that has the date on it, and that date precludes it from being laser cut, my number further goes down to 34 parts. Not much, but it's helpful. Now there's another big helpful part in this. We know that if a part has blue plastic on it, it was a punched parts made at Vans. Now it's very easy to go through my past footage and catch parts that have blue plastic on them, again eliminating them as a potential part that needs replacement. If we do that, I am down to 9 individual SKUs and 13 parts that could potentially need replacement within my aircraft. I say potentially because it doesn't necessarily mean that they were in fact laser cut. It just means that I haven't been able to prove that they aren't. And I still think I can remove some of these from that list. I have additional photos that need to be gone through and even more footage that I need to scour. It just takes a lot of time, hence there being such a big delay in this episode coming out. This is a lot of what I've been doing. Now, me being confident that these parts were not laser cut and somebody else being confident that these parts were not laser cut are two different things. And I would be completely understanding if a future passenger or potential buyer of my aircraft came along and said, Ryan, I'd like to see some proof that these weren't laser cut pieces in your plane. Well, I'm aware that that's going to be the case at some point, and I'm documenting this as well as I can. Frequently, I'm leaning on screenshots or old Instagram posts or photos from my phone that show that these parts are indeed produced at Vans and not laser cut. It is a daunting task, but it's certainly a lot less daunting than drilling out rivets and replacing these parts. I'm happy that I have the footage I have. I'm happy that I have a lot lower parts count than many and can go at this rebuilding task with a lot less work in front of me. Now, it's not no work whatsoever because I have identified some parts that are in need of replacement. In fact, very prominently, I've showed that the spars on my flaps were indeed laser cut. You can see that in an old video thumbnail, I believe. At the very least, it's on several Instagram posts of all the parts laid out, and right in the middle are 2 flap spars without blue plastic. They don't meet the date criteria, and I have no way of otherwise showing that they aren't laser cut. And with all that evidence mounting against it, I'm fairly confident that I can say they are laser cut, and they will be replaced in my airplane before it ever leaves the ground. So where are we at? We're at probably a half dozen parts that are going to be drilled out of my plane and replaced. And that sucks, but that is nothing compared to what I've seen from some builders. There are a lot of builders who have parts counts in the dozens, if not hundreds, that they're looking to have replaced. And that's a bummer. I feel for them. I especially feel for them if the parts weren't on the shelf, but rather in the airplane. That just sucks, man. And I hope that Vans is doing everything they can in order to get to a solution as quickly as possible. So with that, that's about it for laser cut corners. I'm hopefully fairly close to getting these parts in stock and then soon replaced in my kit. In the meantime, I have a lot that I can work on. In fact, I have everything ahead of me that I feel confident I'm able to work on without putting my build in jeopardy. And now hopefully you see a little bit as to why. And just a final note, for those of you who may be inclined to caution me about accepting Van's guidance of parts that are acceptable for use, I am continuing to go through my footage and eliminate even those from need of replacement. Again, I'm fairly confident that my kit contained very, very few laser cut parts to begin with. And if I can show that out of the 100 or so that are deemed acceptable for use, maybe only a handful of those even were laser cut, I might as well. So with that, I want to get back to the build. Thank you. It's dimpled, and it feels good to be back building again. As always, the priming booth is a bit small. It's a bit of a panoramic effect with this skin, but it fits. We'll get the door closed. I'll get them shot with white. We'll move on to the next one. That did not work. Similar problem to what happened with part of the longerons. I got these spots in the paint, and I think it's moisture. I don't know why I haven't had this problem before. I quickly ran to the store. I bought 4 different moisture traps, 2 different kinds. Nothing works. Problem persists. So I wiped off the little bit of paint I had on there, and now I'm cleaning up. We'll do some searching as to why that did not work, and I will try again, but unfortunately not today. So that'll put us a couple days behind. It sucks, man. Well, as you can see, I got the piece primed. I hit the internet trying to do some research, also posting some questions about why I might be getting these spots. Now again, the spots would appear immediately after the primer touched the surface. They would blossom over about a half a second, and they were riddled throughout everything I sprayed. Theories were everything from spraying too thick, moisture in the lines. That was my personal favorite. I really thought that was the problem. Surface contamination, a little bit of everything. I had eliminated most of those, at least in my head, and then I read one comment online about an individual who knew someone who was having some problems, and they chased it, couldn't find it until they took a look at what they were stirring the primer with, and it turned out they were introducing contamination then. And while I've just been stirring with popsicle sticks, one thing I did recently change is using a pump to get my hardener, the activator, from the big gallon jug into my paint cup. That big jug is a pain in the butt to pour from, and I thought, well, I've got an epoxy pump, let's try that. It turns out, at least I believe, that was the problem. I removed the epoxy pump. I've added additional moisture traps, but that was before, and that still had no effect. One batch of primer without that pump, and I didn't encounter the problem again. I sprayed thick, I sprayed on unprepared surfaces, I did everything, and I couldn't for the life of me get that same issue. So again, I believe it was the pump. And with that, I was able to get this primer. Now, I'm happier, but I'm not completely happy. I think my primer was a bit thick, and as you can see, not only did I get some matte sort of appearance that I'm not incredibly excited about, there's also some areas that are a little thin. This is the cockpit, this is the cabin. I want this correct. I'm going to see if I can, once again, fine-tune this. I've Scotch-Brighted it all. I'm going to wipe it down, and I'm going to hit it with one thin coat of primer that has a little bit of thinner in it, and see if we can't just get this perfect. I'm not excited about the additional weight of one coat, but I think doing it on one part and getting it right and knowing the process, I think it'll help me through the rest of these pieces just to get primer that I'm happy with. So one more light coat on this, we'll start preparing the second one, and we'll start working our way through all the priming and prep that we have to do to get this freaking thing back together. The other skin's drying in the booth. You know, putting paint over an imperfect coat of paint isn't really gonna get you all the way there. But it looks a little better, it looks a little more even, and it looks like it might come out with a little bit of shine and match more closely with everything else in the cockpit. I hope I'll be happy with it. I don't have a lot of option at this point, except to start on number 2. Same deal here, deburr, dimple, finish all parts that need to be finished. Still paying very close attention to the plans and my notes, and eventually get it back in that booth for priming. want to stop right there. I've done a couple things differently, very simple things, but this has never gone smoother. 2 reasons. For some reason, I've never bothered to clamp the back of this thing down. I just did, and it makes it so much easier. Second, this material roller that I got from Home Depot, hands down some of the best, like $8 friggin' I've ever spent. It allows you to really extend your surface here up to a height that you need. Before I had it extending out at table height, now I've got it extending out at the deck height of this thing. Quick adjust, makes this a breeze. What brought it out of the booth, it's only been a couple hours, but it's dry to the touch. I think I got a really light coat on this, which is contributing a little bit to that sort of speckled matte finish. I'm all right with it in this instance. It's gonna match its brother over there against the wall. I think it looks fantastic. I think it'll look great in the plane. Plus, it's gonna do what it was originally intended to do, which is it's a primer. It's there to protect against corrosion, and certainly it will do at least that. That means the skins, the side skins are done. I'm gonna go ahead and kind of start to evaluate what I think is the next biggest chunk of this and take it down. If it looks tight in here, it absolutely is. If it looks disorganized, it's driving me nuts. However, I really want to get these skins painted. It's sort of part of my steps towards getting things a little bit more organized. With them painted and ready to go back on the plane, I can push them back up against the wall, free up a little space, and hopefully in all of this start to find some additional organization. I've decided to go with the bottom skin. I'm in skin mode, and I think while I've got the primer kind of fresh in the head, priming a piece this large will be nice. So before we do that, the usual: dimple, deburr, not necessarily in that order, countersink, possibly. And just like every piece of this, it has some difficulties. We gotta, again, keep an eye on our rivet guide, our rivet plan with the skins. For example, these two here will not be countersunk. They're getting universal head rivets. These 4 are going to be bolts that attach our gear weldments, so don't do anything with those. These are various sizes of dimpled with number 40s and number 30s. This one takes countersunk screws, so we won't do anything with that. And that's kind of the story throughout this whole piece. There's some here that we certainly can't dimple because it'll create clearance problems with that same weldment I spoke about, but we've already countersunk those in a previous episode, so I know to stay clear of those. Everything else, I will go ahead and dimple, but after doing my initial clean and scouring with the 3M. Again, with the skins, it's just easier in that order. We'll go ahead and deburr the edges, dimple, and then I'll go ahead and prime it. The situation is slightly better. I can close the door. I feel like I know what I'm doing a little more. I have high hopes for this skin. We're gonna get it painted and keep marching on. Now, it goes to figure the part that'll be covered and nobody will ever see is looking the best. The floor is coming out fantastic. As you can see, nice and shiny. The difference, more paint. I've been a little scared to add too much paint ever since that was a potential problem with the spotting. It of course wasn't. and I felt a little liberated to crank it up on the gun a bit, and the results are clear. It looks great, and it's not so thick that it's gumming up anything. It's still a nice lightweight thin coat, but there's enough for it to just spread out and get that gloss finish that I was hoping would be over all the surfaces in the cockpit. Now there is going to be a little bit of variation from panel to panel. It's just something we're going to have to deal with. Well, with this minor success, I'm going to call it quits for this one. I still have a boatload of editing. If there's any hope of me finally getting a video up, thank you all for being patient. Thank you for tuning in. Thanks for liking my videos and sending me comments. I really appreciate it. We'll see you next time on Ryan Flies.